At 84, I finally sat down and counted my regrets. Not the ones that sound wise, the real ones. There were 11. I was sitting at my desk. The house was quiet. Outside the window, the street was doing what streets do in January in Ohio. Gray and still and entirely indifferent to whatever was happening inside the houses along it. I had a yellow legal pad in front of me, and I was doing something I had been avoiding for 84 years. I was counting. Not money, not years, not the usual arithmetic of a man who has lived long enough to have a great deal to account for. I was counting regrets, the actual ones, not the packaged versions I had been presenting to people for decades, not the ones that sound wise when you say them out loud, not the ones that have been sanded down into lessons that make the person telling them sound like someone who has arrived at understanding, rather than someone who is still sitting inside the damage. The raw ones. The ones that arrive uninvited at 2 in the morning. The ones that have specific faces and specific dates and specific moments attached to them that I can still see with a clarity that 30 or 40 years of distance has done nothing to reduce. I wrote for 2 hours. When I was done, I counted what I had written. 11. Not hundreds. Not the sprawling catalog of a man who has spent 84 years getting everything wrong. 11 specific things. That is the number it came to when I finally sat down and did it honestly. And the 11 surprised me. Not because they were unexpected, every one of them was entirely expected. Because of how specific they were, how named, how completely unresolved despite the decades I had spent telling myself I had made peace with them. My name is Harold Voss. I am 84 years old. My heart is running at 38%. Today I am going to tell you all 11. Not the cleaned up versions. Not the lessons extracted from them after the fact, the actual regrets, exactly as I wrote them on that yellow legal pad on a Thursday afternoon in January. Because I think you need to hear what 11 unresolved things look like after 84 years, and because I think most of you have your own list that you have never sat down to count. Before I begin, I need to ask you something. Have you ever actually counted your regrets? Not thought about them vaguely, not carried them around in the background, not referred to them occasionally when a conversation or a video or a quiet evening brought one of them briefly to the surface. Actually sat down and counted them, written them on a piece of paper and looked at the number. Write yes or no in the comments, because the number matters. The number is the honest accounting of what you are carrying, and most men never know the number because they never do the counting. I did not do it until I was 84 years old. That is 42 years later than I should have. Regret 1. I was not there when my father died. He died on a Wednesday morning in March of 1979. I was in Cincinnati. He was in Cleveland. The hospital called at 6:40 in the morning. I was on the road by 7. I arrived at 11:17. He had died at 9:42, 1 hour and 35 minutes. That is the gap. I have known that gap for 45 years. 1 hour and 35 minutes between when he died and when I walked into the room. I have never been able to decide whether I would have made it if I had driven faster. I drove fast. I do not know if I drove fast enough. I have never fully resolved that question. I carry it still. Regret 2. I never told my father I loved him, not once. In 35 years of having a father, not because he was not worthy of it, not because I did not feel it, because we were men who did not say that to each other. Because the language of love between a father and a son in the house I grew up in was performed through presence and provision, and not through the words themselves. I understood that. I accepted it as simply how things were. And then he died on a Wednesday morning in March, and I drove 1 hour and 35 minutes too slowly, and I never got to say the thing I had been performing in every other language for 35 years. I wrote that on the legal pad and I looked at it for a long time. 35 years. Never once. Regret 3. David's debate competition. March 14, 1997. I have told you about this before. I will not tell it again in full, just the number. 16. He was 16 years old. He won first place. I was not there. I have thought about that nod more than almost any other single moment of my life. The nod his mother described when she told him I was not coming. He did not say anything. He just nodded and went upstairs. Regret 4. I chose the desk over the dinner table more times than I can count. But I can count one specific time that I cannot let go of. Thomas was 7 years old. It was his birthday, a Saturday in September of 1985. I came home at 4 in the afternoon to find the birthday cake already cut, and the presents already opened, and Thomas already in his room with the thing I had missed sitting quietly between us for the rest of the evening. I had told myself the morning that I would be home by noon. I was home at 4. I told myself he was 7, that he would not remember. He remembered. He told me so 30 years later, not angrily. Thomas does not do things angrily, just matter-of-factly. The way you state something that has been true for so long it no longer requires emotion. He said, "I remember my 7th birthday, Dad. I remember you came home at 4. I said, "I know." He said, "I know you know." And we left it there. Regret 5. I managed Margaret instead of knowing her. 51 years of marriage, the distance, the glass layer, the managed surface. I have talked about all of it at length in other videos, and I will not repeat the full accounting here. Just the specific cost I wrote on the legal pad. She spent 51 years trying to reach the actual Harold. She found him in the last 2, and then she was gone. Regret 6. I went back to work 6 weeks after the parking garage. The cardiologist said 3 months. I went back in 6 weeks. Not because I had to, not because the firm needed me urgently, not because anything would have collapsed without me there, because I did not know who I was if I was not there, and I was not willing to sit in the quiet long enough to find out. I paid for that decision with the 38% I have left. Not entirely. There were other factors, but 6 weeks instead of 3 months was a decision I made freely, and my heart is at 38%. I know those two things are connected. Regret 7. I lent Gerald money in 2007, and I let it become a distance between us. Gerald had been my closest friend since 1981, 26 years. He needed money for a medical situation his insurance would not cover. I gave him $60,000. He paid back 30 over the following years. He died in 2009, unable to pay the rest. I never asked for it. But I also never fully released it, not consciously, not deliberately. Just in the small and specific way that an unpaid debt between two men who are too proud to discuss it creates a slight cooling that neither of them names and neither of them fully resolves. For 2 years before he died, there was something between Gerald and me that had not been there before 2007. Not anger, not resentment, just something. And then he was gone, and the something went with him. And I have spent 15 years wishing I had named it while he was still there to hear the naming. $30,000. That is what 2 years of distance and 15 years of carrying it cost. Regret. 8. I told my children with my actions that work was more important than they were. Not in words, never in words. In every word I said, I communicated the opposite. But children do not learn from words. They learn from what they see. And what Claire and David and Thomas saw across 20 years of growing up in my house was a man who came home after they were in bed more nights than not, who was physically present at the dinner table and mentally elsewhere, who attended the events he attended with the specific visible distraction of a man who was always partially somewhere else. They learned from what they saw, and what they learned was the lesson I spent 20 years trying not to teach them. Regret. 9. I did not go to Margaret's first oncology appointment. She was diagnosed in the spring of 2020. The first appointment was on a Tuesday. I had a commitment I told myself I could not rearrange. I rearranged it the following week. I was there for every appointment after the first one. I was not there for the first one. She did not say anything about it then. A year later, 3 weeks before she died, she said, "I remember going to the first appointment alone, Harold." I said, "I know, I am sorry," she said. "I know you are." And she looked at me for a moment in the specific way that meant she had forgiven me and was not going to pretend it had not happened. I was not there for the first appointment. I will carry that for whatever time I have left. Regret 10. I spent more energy managing how I appeared than becoming who I wanted to be. This one is harder to make specific than the others. It does not have a date or a conversation or a moment attached to it. It is the sum of 10,000 small decisions made across 60 years. The car, the club, the neighborhood, the school, the investment I could not say no to in a room full of men who were nodding. Every decision made to produce a performance rather than a life. I spent 60 years performing Harold Voss. I met Harold Voss in a therapist's office at 80 years old. He was nothing like the performance. He was better. and I had 60 years of not being him. That is regret 10. Regret 11. I did not tell Margaret I loved her enough, not in the way she needed to hear it, not frequently, not specifically, not in the particular and daily way that means something different from the occasional and weighty declaration. I said it. I am not saying I never said it. I said it at the right moments, the significant moments, the moments where not saying it would have been an obvious absence. But the ordinary moments, the Tuesday mornings, the Wednesday evenings, the nothing in particular afternoons where it would have meant something precisely because there was no occasion for it. I was not a man who said it in those moments. I am not sure why. I have thought about it a great deal, and I do not have an answer that fully satisfies me. I just know that she deserved to hear it more than she did, and I had 51 years to say it more, and I did not. 11. That is the number. I sat at my desk on a Thursday afternoon in January, and I looked at that number for a long time. And I thought about what it means that a man can live 84 years and arrive at 11 specific things he cannot fully make peace with. Not hundreds. 11. The smallness of the number did not comfort me, because each of them is as large as it is. David's nod going upstairs. Thomas at 4 in the afternoon on his 7th birthday. 1 hour and 35 minutes. The first oncology appointment. Tuesday mornings when I did not say it. Here is my second question for today. If you sat down right now with a yellow legal pad and wrote your own list honestly, not the packaged version, not the lessons, not the things you have made peace with, the actual unresolved ones, what would your number be? Write it in the comments, just the number. I read every single one. And if the number surprises you, that is important information. That is the honest accounting of what you are still carrying. And you do not have to carry all of it until you are 84 years old, sitting at a desk on a Thursday afternoon in January, finally doing the counting. You can do the counting now, while there is still time to close some of them. I closed 2 of mine in those last 2 years with Margaret, not 11, 2. But 2 was real, and real is worth more than I knew how to say at the time. Leave me a comment, write the number. I read every single one. And if someone you know has a list they have never counted, send this to them. Just send it. More is coming. Stay close.